Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for those comments. I'd like to also welcome our other panelists to the stage. Finland's President, Alexander Stubb, the U.S. Senator from the great state of Delaware, Chris Coons, and Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen. Great to see you. I just want to pick up on that point, Prime Minister, because you're talking about Vladimir Putin and you're talking about nuclear strength. You're also discussing how Europe can best defend itself. Walk me through this, because Spain is lagging behind in its NATO spending, and you have the fastest growing economy in the Eurozone. Walk us through that. How does that make sense?
Well, first of all, there are trade-offs that we disagree when it comes to this 5% of GDP in defense. Second, I do believe that we need also to focus on capabilities and contributions. And as I said earlier, of course, we have doubled not only the presence of Spanish soldiers in NATO missions, but also we have tripled the investments on defense expenditure when it comes to our GDP. But last but not least, I think that what we need to do in the coming years is to strengthen the European pillar of NATO, within NATO. And
how do you do that without spending?
No, we can do it. But what we have to do is to strengthen the European defense industry. And that means that paradoxically, if we agree with this idea of 5%, at the end of the day, we will become more dependent on the US defense industry. And that is why I think that we need to focus more on not only how much do we spend, but how much do we spend together and therefore better. So all in all, what I'm trying to say is that the challenge that we have within the European Union is how do we strengthen the European pillar within NATO.
President Stubb, are you buying that?
I'm buying a lot of defense equipment, that's for sure. No, I mean, the starting point is that, we are, of course, a new member in the alliance and hopefully a security provider rather than a security consumer. And there's a reason why our path towards membership was so quick. We basically made ourselves NATO compatible ever since the beginning of the 1990s by purchasing, for instance, at the time 64 F-18 fighter jets. And probably because we were not members of NATO, we kept our defense expenditure up. But I always stress that it's not always about the percentages, it's about the capabilities. And what we've tried to do in Finland is to set up basically the strongest Arctic force that we have within the alliance, which is trying to stave off a possible security threat coming from Russia. And in that sense, when NATO's defense expenditure goes up to 5%, when America asks us to take more responsibility for our own defense, as a Finn, I'm actually quite pleased with that.
Prime Minister, I was going to kick off with you, so I apologize. In your mind, when we're talking about security, when we're talking about defense, how likely is it that you're going to have to defend Greenland?
So nice to be on stage with you.
Thank you.
And nice to be with my allies and my friends and my partners. Well, let me put it this way. I mean, if one NATO country attacks another NATO country, then NATO ends.
It's game over.
Then it's game over. So I hope I answer your question by that. Coming back to the other question, I mean, what does it take to defend NATO? I think we have to look at, our circumstances. So it's quite clear we have an eastern flank. It will not be over. I mean, even if we succeed in having some kind of a peace deal, our problem is that Putin don't want peace with us. So he's going, I'm sorry guys, he will continue. He will continue in Ukraine, or he will try to continue somewhere else. So we have an eastern flank, and it's going to be very expensive. We have a southern flank, because we have to count terrorism. And at some stage, we will see migration being used as a weapon, as we have seen from Belarus into Lithuania, or in Finland, or in Poland. We have a flank when it comes to new technologies, AI, space, quantum physics, and we have a northern flank when it comes to the high north and the Arctic region. And when you look at all these challenges, I mean, now we spend 3.5% of our GDP in Denmark on defense. I'm not sure it will be enough. Because my responsibility as a European leader is not only to protect my own country or the region where I belong, together with you, Alexander. It is my responsibility to protect the entire NATO. So I think 3.5, as we agreed on, unfortunately we agreed on 2035, it will be too late. So for me the 3.5 is now, latest by 2030, and maybe it won't be enough.
You think you can convince your Spanish colleague?
I don't think I have to convince Pedro on anything. I agree with you, Pedro, that this is also a question about what kind of capabilities can we actually buy. We have a problem transatlantic with our industrial base. I mean, some of the capabilities that we have decided to invest in when it comes to the Arctic region cannot be delivered from US because the speed is simply not in production lines. We have exactly the same problem in Europe. They don't have in Ukraine. So in Ukraine, they are able to produce faster and better than the rest of us, even though they are at war. It's not only because they are really clever guys, they are, by the way, and not only because they received money from us and other partners, it's also because we work too slow. So let me just finish by saying, I mean, we know how it is to work with capability targets within NATO. Maybe next time when we have capability targets, we should get them into industrial targets immediately. So we know where the gaps are, we know where we need to invest more, and it has, to, of course, also to be in our European defense industry.
You were talking about flanks, northern flank, southern flank. What about the western flank? What is the threat in your mind to Greenland today? I know you were going to be speaking with Secretary of State Rubio. Has the crisis passed?
No, unfortunately not. I think the desire from the US President is exactly the same. He is very serious about this theme. And as you know, I disagree with him. And we disagree, of course, as a Kingdom of Denmark. And by the way, Europe disagree because we have received a lot of support and help. And I know some American friends do disagree as well. I do agree that we need to do more collectively when it comes to security in the Arctic region. And by the way, Arctic is a very big area. And if you look at the challenges on stage right now, it's more actually in another direction. But at some point, we will see some challenges around Greenland as well. But I mean, now we have Arctic Sentry. So while we are here in Munich, the day before we decided within NATO to start Arctic Sentry. I think it's the right framework. And we have a lot of commitments from the Arctic states in NATO and other allies to be now permanent present in and around Greenland. And that's a very, very important step forward.
And just to be clear, can you put a price on Greenland? Because he's trying to.
Of course not. Can you put a price on the part of Spain or a part of US or a part of anywhere else in the world? I mean, we are in, this is some of the most basic democratic values and principles. We have to respect sovereign states. The Kingdom of Denmark is a sovereign state, of course. And we have to respect people's right for self-determination. And the Greenlandic people have been very clear. They don't want to become Americans. They want to stay as a Greenlandic people, and I, of course, support them in that.
Senator, you have the unenviable task of defending America's position at this point. In your mind, where do we go from here?
Forward. We've always had the challenge. Look, for decades, we've had the challenge of not committing enough resources to our collective defense. Today, we have an abundance of resources. As we've discussed, capabilities, coordination, and trust are now our core challenges. I'm the lead Democrat on defense appropriations. We appropriated $850 billion in the bill just signed by President Trump. We are committing resources. NATO has stepped forward and made bold commitments to Ukraine, to collective security, to investment in new systems. We've got the resources. Now we need to be smarter about it, and we need to find ways together to tackle the domains where some of us have strength and some of us have weaknesses. In order for us to be successful in this century, AI, quantum, space, telecommunications are critical, but so too is the high north, the Arctic. So too is figuring out how we manage a path forward that is not just rooted in a shared culture and history, but in shared values and principles. Because that is what ties us as well to Korea, to Japan, to Australia, to Singapore. Around the world, we are desirable as partners for trading and for security, not because of ethnicity or faith or language or historic civilization roots, but because of the restraint on executive power, the separation of powers in our democratic governments, and respect for principles like sovereignty and self-determination. You asked me to defend the American position. I will tell you only 17% of Americans want to in any way be involved in threatening Greenland. The vast majority of Americans saw this as a foolish gambit. NATO is overwhelmingly popular with the American people. We were able to appropriate significantly for NATO, for collective defense, for Ukraine. We should do more and we will, because it remains popular with the American people. And last, I'll remind you, it was then Senator Rubio who introduced an amendment to our annual defense authorization law that prevents any one president from unilaterally withdrawing from NATO. And we have added amendments this year that require certain troop levels and requires certain consultation. The American people know that our security and our future lies with NATO and lies with this community of shared principles.
When I interviewed Vladimir Putin in 2021, he told me, among many other things, that he had already deployed hypersonic missiles on a submarine in the Arctic. President Stubb, how complicated is the situation today, and more specifically, how much danger are we in from Russia?
I mean, to start off with, you always have to look at a silver lining in extremely complicated situations. If the outcome of what happened in Davos and what we've seen with Greenland in the past few months is a stronger Arctic presence from NATO, stronger Arctic security, then I think we've done quite well. But just like Mette said, the Arctic is a huge area. There are basically 8 countries that have Arctic ownership. 7 of them are in NATO, including, of course, Canada and the United States, with the Nordics. The biggest security conglomerate that we have right now in the Arctic is Finland, Sweden, and Norway. So we're very focused on that. Just to give you an example, next week there's going to be an Arctic training with 25,000 NATO soldiers, 5,000 from the US in northern Norway and in northern Finland. And of course, we're not doing this just to showcase, but we are looking at different scenarios. And I think the importance of Norway, Finland, and Sweden up there, including, of course, Denmark, is that the biggest center of nuclear weapons from Russia are in the Koala Peninsula and in Murmansk. If you ask me the question, how big is the danger? Russia is not going to test the resolve of Article 5. There's a reason why we deter. There's a reason why a country like Finland has one of the largest militaries in NATO. On the eastern flank that has been talked about, there's Turkey, Ukraine, Poland, and Finland. I don't see a direct security threat coming from Russia right now, but I'm so in agreement with Mette that when the war is over in Ukraine, the threat is not going to reduce for the rest of Europe or for Central Asia or the Southern Caucasus, because the inherent DNA of Russia and Putin is imperialism and expansion.
Prime Minister Sanchez, you're hearing these comments from your NATO colleagues. In your mind, how do you defend your position when it comes to Russia, when it comes to not spending more?
No, actually, we are spending more, and we are sending troops to the eastern flank of Europe, and we are committed, of course, with security and the territorial integrity of the eastern part of Europe and, of course, of Ukraine. And when it comes to the Greenland, of course, we express our support to the Kingdom of Denmark. No, I think at the end of the day, there is a debate of whether we are sticking to the rules of an international order based in rules, if we stick to the UN Charter principles or not. And I think that when it comes to values and principles, we need to defend those values and principles. And let's not forget that, of course, we have to think about the eastern flank. Of course, we have to think about the Arctic flank. But there's also a reality that you mentioned earlier, which is the southern flank. And for that, we need also to bridge understandings with other countries that belongs to other cultures and societies, that they need to understand from the Western world that we are engaged with them, that we don't accept double standards, that when it comes to territorial integrity, we defend that territorial integrity in Ukraine, but also in Gaza and in the West Bank. And the situation that, now Palestinian people are facing in the West Bank is completely unacceptable. And I think that the leverage, the influence that the Western society and governments could play also in the southern flank is very, very important. Also for the security and the geopolitical interests of the European Union and, of course, therefore, of the transatlantic relationship. So, all in all, we are committed. We are we have this solidarity with the eastern flank of Europe, but let's not forget that in the Madrid strategic concept, when we had the NATO summit, we also agreed upon this idea of 360-degree security approach. And I think that there's a lot of disagreement on that and not a lot of unity when it comes to foresee a potential solution in the conflict of the Middle East.
Mm. Senator Coons, I want to ask you specifically to sort of weigh on this. I did a panel yesterday on energy dominance and the future of Europe. 60% of LNG imports are coming from the United States. They were just in the Gulf countries, Mr. Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, talking to partners there, talking about increasing supplies. The last time I was in Russia, which was not too long ago, the Deputy Prime Minister, who is also the head of the energy file, for your information, said to me that the Americans were price gouging Europe when it comes to LNG. How do we defend that position? Because certainly Europeans are looking for other partners because, of course, they don't want to be in hock to one player when it comes to their energy.
Sure. Look, I think Europe should be seeking energy options where it can, but not from Russia. What is continuing to fund and fuel, literally, Putin's murderous war machine is those countries that continue to buy Russian oil and gas, the single largest buyer being China. China, through the provision of dual-use material and through the provision of funding, is the principal driver of what is sustaining Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. I do think that the United States was able to provide robust LNG supplies now several years ago when the war began, was critical to Europe having an energy alternative. But at the end of the day, I think our future together is in developing the next generation of civil nuclear power, in finding pathways for energy security that do not also fuel aggression.
So no going back to Russian energy?
I'm not buying any Russian energy in the near future.
No, I mean, it just to make things clear, I don't think any of us, would I say, sensible Europeans would go back to Russian energy. What we did in Finland early on was to have a very diverse energy portfolio, including actually nuclear. And when Russian gas was cut off, it was 5 to 10% of our general grid, and most in industry. We were able to diversify, go immediately elsewhere. And I think the whole idea that energy binds us together and interdependence is now over. So we're looking at alternative solutions, I think, in Europe.
But when you think about this, you need, for heavy industry, you need a base load. And that's not going to come from wind or solar. In your mind, are we going to have to really do a rethink in Europe? And you're seeing that happening now a bit, but a rethink of those climate goals and realistically, pragmatically look at the energy.
Okay, I didn't think this was a climate panel, but we can go there as well. I think the starting point is that energy consumption is not going to reduce. And the second starting point is that the transition period from fossil fuels to renewables or clean energy is going to take time, and for that we will need innovation. I still firmly believe that climate change is real. I personally also believe that it is a threat, and I think that those countries that do the conversion through finance, regulation and innovation are going to be ahead of the curve, because we're going to suffocate on fossil fuels before too long.
Senator Coons, would you concede that Donald Trump's moves, at least in terms of the oil market, and pushing sanctions with India, pushing sanctions with those who were still consuming Russian oil, have had great effect in damaging President Putin's war machine?
It's taken too long to get there, but yes, when President Trump imposed sanctions on two of the largest Russian oil companies and has moved to impose additional sanctions, that's very welcome and broadly supported in Congress. It's the pressure on Putin that is needed to move the war of aggression against Ukraine towards a just and sustainable resolution. Regrettably, President Trump has dedicated as much time to pushing Ukraine to make concessions. I am very grateful that our European partners have stepped up to provide the resources, the weaponry, much of which bought from the United States. But we have to balance this equation and push Putin, raise the costs of this war for him, or he will not conclude. And we have to achieve through negotiation, and we had a meeting earlier today with President Zelensky, a just and sustainable peace, or Putin will simply start again. So we have to be clear-eyed about the costs and risks to all of our security of not succeeding in finally stopping Putin now through a just and sustainable peace.
In your mind, is the United States doing enough there? Because right now,
No.
I'm sure you all are aware, people are actually freezing in Ukraine because of the damage that President Putin has done to their energy infrastructure. I know the Europeans have made many commitments, but in terms of the United States, what more can we do?
One of the things that USAID was doing in Ukraine, well and at scale, was helping repair the energy grid, helping to regrow the agricultural economy for export, helping not just sustain but grow Ukraine's economy. When we step back from that, we step back from being a critical partner in Ukraine's viability and in its resiliency in the face of these just merciless attacks on civilian infrastructure. Think about it. The response by Putin to Trump rolling out the red carpet in Alaska was waves and waves of attacks to leave women, children, families in the dark and cold. His answer is clear. Our actions have to be clear as well. We need to do more to put pressure on Putin.
Prime Minister.
And I mean, it shows exactly what this is all about. I mean, if he wanted peace, he wouldn't do what he's doing these days. I mean, and can you imagine? I mean, it's like minus 25 degrees, and then you attack the energy system. I mean, it's so crazy that only Russians would do such a thing. But this is how Russia is, and it will not change. It will not change. And the only language they understand is if we are as tough as they are. And I think our problem in Ukraine is that there are still red lines when it comes to the weapons they can use to win this war. And you cannot win a war with the one hand tied on your back. So, I mean, we need to give them weapons so they can strike into Russia. We have had this discussion for several years. We are still discussing it. I mean, for the last 3 years on this conference, I have said, why are we not providing them the air defense that they need? And everybody is doing like this. They still lack air defense. You cannot protect a country without air defense. We know exactly what we need to deliver, including, of course, membership of NATO, because if they were a NATO member now, if we had been able to take that decision in Vilnius, we would be in a completely different situation now. So we know what to do, but first of all, we have to recognize, we have to understand, we have to learn that Russia will not change, and they are not interested in peace, unfortunately.
Is making Ukraine a member of NATO, President Stubb, the answer?
Well, in the long run, yeah, one of them, I think. I mean, just two assessments. One is the situation and what to do, and I'm completely on the same page with Mette here. First, what's the situation? I mean, let's change the narrative of the war around, because there's still some people that say that Putin is winning this war, and I fundamentally disagree. Look, the strategic aims of Putin was to take over Ukraine, make it Russian. It became European. His strategic aim was to not allow NATO to enlarge. Well, got Finland and Sweden. And his strategic aim was to keep European defense expenditure down, and we're now at 5%. So it's a total strategic failure from Russia's part. Secondly, he's failing militarily. We look at the acquirement of territory. in the first year, in 2014, it was 12% because of the Green Men in the Crimean Peninsula and some in Luhansk and Donetsk. Since then, 8% of Ukrainian territory in 12 years. Last 2 years, 1% of Ukrainian territory. And what is the cost of this? In December, 35,000 Russian soldiers died. In January, 30,000 Russian soldiers died. That's 65,000 soldiers dead in 2 months. Compare that to Afghanistan, where the Soviet Union was for 10 years, and they had 18,000 dead. So it's been a military failure as well, and the Ukrainians are capable now of fighting back. But Mette is 100% right. We need to provide Ukraine with the continued necessary means to do that. Finally, it's been an economic failure for Putin. Reserves are out, growth is zero, inflation is double digits, and interest rates are 16%. So he doesn't want to end this war, not because he thinks he can advance, because he's not advancing. He doesn't want to end this war because the political and social cost of bringing the soldiers back is too high. And then we come to the question to what do we do? Number one, increase the economic pressure, sanctions, maritime services, shadow fleet, hit as hard as you possibly can. And secondly, keep on providing Ukraine with all the necessary means, including tomahawks. And then we will bring this home and Ukraine will win this war.
Prime Minister.
I agree with the points from you, Alexander, but I think, talking about the number of losses, 35,000, if it would be in one of our countries, it would be a major disaster, and we would never be able to forgive ourselves. But it's Russia, and they don't count soldiers by the number of 35,000. I think we have to compare with Second World War and the numbers they lost there. So for them, 35,000, I mean, we cannot compare ourselves with the mindset in Moscow. And unfortunately, I mean...
Well, unfortunately, if you look at the newspapers, they're more concerned with the price of cucumbers.
Yeah, and probably identity more than anything else. And unfortunately for us, I mean, the help they get from Iran, the help they get from North Korea and from China. And it will help them to continue. So therefore, I agree with the points you make, because we need to push them back, and it can only be done by adding more pressure economically, of course, but also militarily, and maybe most important militarily.
Prime Minister.
So I think that within the European Union we understood quite well what were the reasons behind the invasion. Not only an attack to a third country, Ukraine, but also an attack against the European Union as a whole, as a political project. So that is why I think that it was clear for all governments within the European Union that we need to stick together, united, and of course defending Ukraine and its territorial integrity and freedom. But we need to do more. I think that we need to face the reality that within some years, in the near future, we will need to enlarge the European Union and to get Ukraine.
Many would say that's a problem, because that was what galvanized the situation in the first place.
No. I think that there's a, as I said earlier, I think we need to understand that this is not only a challenge against Ukraine, it's also a challenge against the European Union as a whole, as a political project, as a democratic and freedom space within, of course, our continent. So therefore, I think that we need to face that reality. We need to do also our internal structural reforms in order to be more efficient. We need also to increase our competitiveness when it comes to the European Union economy, and therefore to have enough resources in order to increase our deterrence capabilities. And let me add just one thing. There's also in politics like a qualitative, let's say, issues. The debate about Greenland and the territorial integrity, somehow for other countries, not in the Western societies or of course in Russia, But in the global south, in the so-called global south, perhaps it has legitimized somehow what Putin is doing. So I think it is important from the European Union to stick together, to be united, and to say clearly to our friends in the US that territorial integrity is something that we must all respect without any doubt. And therefore, I think it was important to see that we are moving forward, that we are overcoming this situation, because somehow we gave reasons to Putin. And this is something that is weakening us when it comes to the global south. And let me just conclude by saying that, of course, we need to do all this stuff when it comes to Russia and Putin. But we need also to engage in all these global public debates that we have on climate, on global health, on poverty and inequality. These are things that countries and societies from the global south are asking Western societies and governments to face and respond effectively. And my concern is that we're not there. We're just looking at ourselves, of course talking about Russia,
navel
but
gazing,
not talking about other things.
Senator, I want to ask you this specifically. Earlier we heard from Lindsey Graham. He said that with an expletive, nobody cares about Greenland anymore. We're over it. Would you agree? Is the president over Greenland in your mind?
I don't speak for President Trump, but I'll say part of why I thought it was urgent for me to lead a large and bipartisan delegation from the House and the Senate to meet with the Prime Minister and other Danish ministers, Greenlandic leaders, several weeks ago was to send a strong signal that this does not reflect majority American opinion, to express gratitude. We laid a wreath of memory, a memorial wreath at Kastellet at the monument to the 52 Danes who served alongside Americans and other NATO troops and gave their lives in sacrifice in Afghanistan and Iraq. I don't know what the president is thinking, but if this moment produces greater joint investment through NATO in Arctic security, produces an investment by American companies in the sustainable development of Greenland's resources on Greenland's terms and within the framework of the Kingdom of Denmark, that will be a positive thing. But, as I said at the outset, the things that NATO needs to thrive, resources, we have them, coordination of capabilities, we need them, trust. The thing we need to deliver is a restored trust. Because at the end of the day, Article 5 has only been invoked once in our defense. And the delegation that is here from Congress, it's very large. I encourage you to connect with any of us. The commitment to Article 5 and to our collective security as something that is our source of security and prosperity, not some charity to Europe. It is what has strengthened us, is very strong among the American people and the American Congress.
Is there a chance that the NATO alliance is stronger at the end of Donald Trump's second term than it was before?
I hope and pray so, and will work for it to be so. And as President Stubb said, Putin has failed strategically. NATO is bigger. NATO is better funded. NATO is more experienced, and I think NATO is going to be more clear-eyed. We are, yes, going through a difficult time here in terms of trust. But the exercise you were referencing, the work on the eastern flank, the southern flank, in the space above us in the high north, we are working more closely together than ever. And I think the clarity of the threat of Russia and the clarity of the challenge of AI, the PRC, and other challenges in the world should leave us stronger than ever on the other side of this period.
Yeah, we could probably, if we look now 3 years ahead of the Trump term, and I think we could set a goal to determine whether NATO is stronger or not. I think goal number one is the 5% mark, and I think a lot of countries are moving towards that at 3.5% plus 1.5. Number two, I think we should have a stronger Arctic security element, just like Chris said. And number three, I think we should strengthen the European pillar of NATO, because what America is asking us now is to take more responsibility for our defense. So if NATO right now is, say, 60-40, Let's see if we're at 50-50 or 40-60 in terms of us doing more of the conventional stuff. We're still dependent on the American nuclear umbrella. Then I think NATO will have strengthened. But I think the issue of trust is something that we need to work on, as we always do in relationships.
Trust and perhaps polite language. Earlier we heard from Secretary Rubio, and I quote, "We have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline." Now, if you take a step back and look at this from the economics, purely from the numbers, when we look at Europe's share of GDP over the last 20 years, it's significantly declined. In your mind, is Europe ready to get its act together? Because if you want, it's kind of pay to play. If you want to project a strong foreign policy, you have to be able to pay for it. You need strong economies.
You're asking a question from the second happiest country in the world and the happiest country in the world. You know,
who better to answer this?
So, are you third? No.
Well, they're very happy.
Yeah. No, I sometimes, sometimes when I hear the discourse, especially of economists who are looking at accrued GDP as the save-all measurements, I think us coming from Nordic countries, we value welfare societies, which are a combination of open market economies and then clear safety nets. And if I look at our Gini coefficient, if I look at all the measures of international data, which 5 countries are in top 10, whether it's justice, whether it's least corrupt, whether it's open, whether it's welfare, whether it's environment, whether it's open media, gender equality, they are the Nordics. So I don't buy the argument that we're doing bad. I'm actually bloody happy.
And Prime Minister Sanchez, with your continually growing economy, I guess you're pretty happy.
Well, not only that. I mean, we have sun, we have great, great weather.
We have snow.
But just let me add one thing. I don't understand why some, personalities of the U.S. administration see the reality of the European Union project as a threat. Because I think that, this is a fact. I think it's one of the biggest accomplishments of the 20th century. And what we have decided within the European Union is to moving forward. And I think this is for the good of the global stability and the global peace. So therefore, I don't understand why we are seen as a threat.
I don't think you're seen as a threat by the administration. You're seen as a burden, which suggests to me you need better PR.
No, I think that there's some some look at the European Union and wishing to have a more fragmented European Union, while at least these 3 representatives of the European Union were looking and working for a strongest European Union, no? And therefore, we need also to deepen our single market. We need to open ourselves to other regions, such as, this free trade agreement that we reached with Mercosur, and therefore, we need to move in this direction. So this is a reality, and the U.S. need to accept this fact, this reality, that in the future, what they will have in Europe is a more integrate Europe and the European Union. So I think this is...
I'm seeing agreement from the President and Prime Minister. So do you think Donald Trump sees Europe as a threat? The European project?
Well, I think we need to... I mean, you know that I'm pro-European, pro-American, and by definition transatlanticist. So I really try to work at the transatlantic relationship. But I want to deal with the world as it is, not as I wish it would be. I think we need to read the national security strategy of the US in November very carefully. And it has 2 strands. One is an ideological MAGA strand, where there is a thought that European integration is not necessarily a good thing. Accept that. And I think President Trump would agree with that. Secondly, there's a policy strand, which is America first, and then there's a pecking order. The Western Hemisphere comes first, second is in Indo-Pacific, third is Europe, fourth is the Middle East, and 5 is Africa. So now we need to work on this plane, and I think we need to tie ourselves very closely with interests, with values, because ideology is shifting a little bit. So let's just work on this pragmatically.
Prime Minister.
You were asking, about NATO, and let's be honest, the only time in history where the majority of the Europeans and the Americans have been safe is when we had NATO. It's the only time in history. And of course, defense and deterrence, and therefore capabilities and economy is a big part of that. But Article 5 is the most important thing. And there's only once in our history where we had to activate Article 5. That was because what happened in the US. The rest of the time, we have been able to provide freedom, democracy, prosperity, and wealth only because of wordings in Article 5. Because all our enemies knows that if they attack us, they will attack all of us. So spending is important. Our industrial base has to be scaled up, and we have to speed up. We have to spend much more. But maybe the most important thing, when that is secured by us as political leaders, that is our unity. And therefore to question the transatlantic relationship, or to threaten allies, or to do anything that will undermine the idea of Article 5 will be a threat to all of us. So let's stick together. That's my short advice.
And Senator, just to wrap us up, I've been coming to this conference a long time. So have you. How encouraged are you by hearing these remarks?
Look, I think it's important for us to hear each other and to remember our history, our shared sacrifice, and the potential that lies in front of us. Our adversaries are collaborating and cooperating much more closely than before. Iran, North Korea, China are supporting Russia's war of aggression, learning from it, and preparing for future aggression, quite possibly. When President Truman signed the NATO treaty on behalf of the United States, he said people of courage and vision can still determine their own destiny. As I go back to the United States Congress, I will remind my colleagues of the sacrifice and investment by so many European and Canadian partners of ours in NATO to build better societies and to build a better future for all of us. And I'll remind them that if we follow your lead, we might be happier too.
Your Excellencies, thank you so much. Thank you very much.